Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome back to another forecast discussion. Our multi-day severe weather threat is set to begin today, Saturday, November 2nd, across parts of the southern plains, before moving east tomorrow into Monday. Now that we have a little bit of clarity, a little bit more clarity than we had before, I wanted to come back and do another forecast discussion video detailing the threat for today, going into tomorrow and Monday. Still, of course, as we said, there are going to be multiple rounds of severe convection, and that is going to have an impact on the environment for later on in each afternoon. We're going to see convection persisting into tomorrow morning across parts of the southern plains. That is going to have a pretty significant effect on where the best instability is going to set up tomorrow, and then that same thing on Monday. So we still need to figure out. It's going to be very much a case where we're going to have to wait and see how the convection progresses going into each of these days. But we do have a little bit more clarity in the models, a little bit more clarity in the data, especially for today. So I wanted to come back and do a discussion on the next few days. Starting with today, we have a slight risk out from far southeast New Mexico, West Texas, northeastward, all the way up to the Oklahoma City metro area for today and tonight. Marginal risk surrounding that up to the Kansas-Oklahoma border down into almost the Big Bend region of West Texas. All hazards are on the table for today. We do have a 5% tornado risk that is maximized there in the southeast New Mexico, West Texas corridor, including places like Midland, Jal, New Mexico, Andrews, Texas, Seminole, just to the north of the Fort Stockton area, Pecos, Texas, under the gun for that greatest tornado risk for today. And then a large 2% extends all the way up into the Oklahoma City metro area, including places like Lubbock, Wichita Falls, Abilene, Lawton, over toward Oklahoma City and Norman. There is also going to be a large hail threat for today. We could see some large to very large hail, especially within the yellow stippled region here. Kind of the same corridor as that 5% tornado risk. Supercells are expected down there with a large to very large hail threat, perhaps 2+ inch in diameter hailstones in some of those more robust storms. And then a damaging wind risk is on the table tonight, particularly for this morning round of storms, which we'll talk about in a second, and for storms that can kind of congeal into a line this evening. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a bit. Then we go into tomorrow. Very complex setup for tomorrow, but the SPC has outlined a slight risk basically from north central into western Oklahoma, southward and southwestward, all the way down toward almost the Midland, Odessa area, Oklahoma City, Lawton, Wichita Falls, Abilene, in that yellow level 2 out of 5 slight risk area there. All hazards are on the table once again. Tornado threat is at a 5% there from OKC, kind of the OKC I-40 corridor south and southwestward down toward Wichita Falls and Abilene. Large hail and damaging winds are also going to be a threat tomorrow as well. Then we have Monday's risk, broad slight risk. Again, still some uncertainty in where the greatest corridor of severe threat may end up setting up, but for now just a broad slight risk all the way up from eastern Missouri southwestward through the eastern half of Oklahoma, western Arkansas, down into northern and central Texas, all the way down basically almost from the Jefferson City, Missouri area, all the way down toward Austin, Texas. So a very broad, far-reaching severe risk for Monday. But again, not quite sure where that maybe the greatest threat is going to set up at this point. So we're going to have to wait and see how that plays out. SPC, though, has this broad risk and does mention a risk for all severe hazards possible on Monday, but it looks like it might mostly be a damaging wind risk on Monday, and we'll show you why here in just a little bit. So let's take a look at what's going on right now. This is the current satellite imagery, and lots of activity already ongoing. I'm recording this just before 10 a.m. Central Daylight Time here in Norman, and we have a lot of activity going on already. You can see this big plume of thunderstorms here across West Texas and Oklahoma and all the way up into Kansas. That is a very far-reaching band of thunderstorms that has been ongoing this morning due to a little bit of a shortwave trough that has moved through already, and lots of warm moist advection, advecting and transporting a very moist air mass up into this region. Very significant band of thunderstorms here. A few severe weather warnings within this line, particularly down here across the Lubbock area. There is a mesoscale discussion out right now. Again, this is as of 10 a.m., about 10 a.m. Central Daylight Time. Mesoscale discussion is out for this band here. Severe wind gust or possibly a brief tornado could be possible with these storms here, particularly in that West Texas corridor right now. Storms are already surface-based. We'll show you that in just a second. So the all-hazard threat is going to be in place going through the rest of the day. So this band of storms is expected to continue to move off to the east. I'll animate it here for you to show the movement. Basically moving off to the due east here, so that will impact areas like the Oklahoma City metro area. Probably by the time you see this video, we'll be getting a hit here with the storms in the OKC metro area. But places like Wichita and Kansas City probably also going to see some rain and storms here within the next hour or so. That is going to move off, and of course, when you have a lot of convection like this in the morning, that's always an eyebrow raiser as far as perhaps what the environment might look like later on in the afternoon. You can see how kind of progressive and propagational, if you will, these storms are down here. You can see not necessarily so much the movement of these storms, but you can see new updrafts forming right on the leading edge of the ongoing convection. That indicates pretty strong outflow that is being produced by these storms. So that outflow boundary, where that ends up and where that pushes kind of the effective warm front, the northern bound of the most favorable environment here, is going to dictate where that greatest severe threat is going to set up. And it does look like it's going to set up, perhaps continue to push a little bit farther to the south here and set up somewhere in the West Texas corridor, somewhere in the far southeast New Mexico to West Texas corridor. Again, that's just something we're going to have to watch over the next few hours to see where this boundary kind of sets up, and that boundary may be a focus for severe storms later on. Now, if we continue to see storms fire on the back side of this complex, that could be a little bit of a concern as far as pushing that boundary even farther to the south, somewhere here along the I-20 corridor even. So again, it's a little bit unclear where exactly this is going to set up at this point, but where it does set up could be a focus for supercells with all hazards later on this afternoon. All right, let's take a look at some upper air maps right now. 500 millibar map from the SPC mesoanalysis page. And once again, we talked about this big old trough that is going to be digging down into the western half of the U.S. over the next couple of days. For today, though, just broad southwesterly flow well out ahead of the trough axis. This trough is going to continue to mature through the day, just continue to dig down into the desert southwest and western Mexico. And we're going to have just a persistent broad southwesterly flow out ahead of this trough axis for today's setup. So we're going to have to rely on those surface features, that convective outflow boundary, and perhaps some little embedded shortwaves in here to really initiate the severe threat going into this afternoon and evening. Speaking of shortwaves, let's go down to 700 millibars, see if we can see anything. Little bit of a wave, perhaps right in here across Kansas and Oklahoma, could be influencing what's going on down here across the West Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas corridors. A little bit of one back in here, perhaps. These are very, very subtle shortwaves. As you can see, not a whole lot of well-defined curvature with these little waves here, but they could be just enough to initiate storms going into the next several hours here, depending on where that boundary sets up. 850 millibars. Here is our low-level jet at this point. We have not seen a very robust low-level response yet. That's because the trough is still well back here off to the west in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere. So even though we do have somewhat stronger southwesterly flow traversing the Rockies here, which would initiate Lee cyclogenesis, we haven't really seen that in spades yet. As you go back to 500 millibars, still not quite super strong flow here around in the east side, on the east side of this trough axis. So we have not seen robust low-level cyclone development. That should wait to take place probably maybe tonight into tomorrow, and we'll have a much more robust low-level pattern for tomorrow's setup. And we talked about that in our previous video. A little bit more of a nebulous kind of setup for today, and we're going to have to rely really on that outflow boundary to focus the severe potential for this afternoon and evening. Down at the surface, let's take a look at some surface data. Once again, that is very evident here at the surface. No real well-defined surface low out here anywhere, just to the east side of the Rockies. We have, maybe a couple little closed contours in here and there, but nothing really well-defined at all. And again, it's going to come down to that outflow boundary, which is going to focus the severe threat, since we don't have any real frontal boundaries or tight surface lows to really give some extra oomph and convergence and lift to this setup. So that outflow boundary is going to be key, and where it sets up could be the focus for a robust severe threat going into the afternoon. Some raw surface data for you here. And as we talked about, those winds, which were northerly a couple days ago when we did that video across the plains, helping to push that moisture down into South Texas, those quickly flipped around to southeasterly out here across Texas and Oklahoma, and has really pumped that moisture up into West Texas. You can see where that gradient is right now. 50s dew points off to the north of basically Plainview to Childress, with 60s dew points to the south. That's exactly where this ongoing convection is occurring right now, and our most robust air mass is to the south of that. Not really a robust wind shift yet. We can't really see that. We do see a little bit here between Plainview and Lubbock, and that's right where that boundary is at this point. And again, where that wind shift and outflow boundary sets up is going to be key for this afternoon's severe threat. Dew points, farther west you go, a little bit of a drop-off in dew points here. Dew points in the low 60s out in the Fort Stockton, the Pecos Valley up here into the Midland, Odessa area, with much more robust moisture off to the east. We see a 66 there, 67 degree dew point at Sweetwater, Texas. San Angelo, 72 over 64. Brownwood over here in the 66 to 70 range. So robust moisture, not that far off. Again, we're not going to have a robust low-level cyclone here to really pump that moisture up into these regions. So we may be stuck here with kind of low to mid 60s dew points, which for this time of year is more than enough moisture to get the job done for a severe threat. But that might also depend on the degree of mixing. We did see a bit of clearing out here across West Texas. Temperatures already in the 70s across this region, so that may allow for a little bit of vertical mixing. A little bit of drier air aloft may be ushered down to the surface, further decreasing dew points a little bit. So we may see a little bit storms be on the high-based side, perhaps. Temperatures approaching the 80s there at the surface, maybe low 80s with dew points in the low 60s. That's a little bit high on the temperature dew point spreads there at the surface for tornadic supercells. In this region, sometimes that just doesn't matter, but that is something to watch for this afternoon with temperatures all the way already approaching 70. Expected to increase further with that heating across West Texas and southeast New Mexico. Those temperatures may approach the low 80s, and that may usher in some vertical mixing as well, decreasing dew points a little bit. But these better dew points not that far off here, so even just a little bit of an increase in low-level flow out of the southeast may push these mid to upper 60s dew points into this region, helping that out. So not too much of a concern, but something to watch, especially for those of you chasing out there today. Mixing could be an issue come this afternoon. Here is some morning sounding data. This is at Midland, Odessa, Texas, so right in there, right smack dab in the middle of that 5%. Already a very good looking profile throughout the entire atmosphere here. Already a lot of instability for a 7 a.m. sounding here, almost 1,000 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE. A little bit of a warm nose here just below 700 millibars, so we are slightly capped, but very close to being fully surface-based here, and it looks like this convection is pretty much surface-based out here across this region. Hence the risk for a damaging wind gust or brief tornado from this band out here across West Texas as it moves off to the east. It's because we're basically surface-based here. Not going to take much heating at all out ahead of that band and out to the southwest to really get robust surface-based instability to build. 68 over 63 at the surface, very unseasonably moist there at the surface. Somewhat of a deep moist layer, extending up above to about 800 millibars there. So plenty of low-level moisture, a little bit of drier air aloft, some steeper lapse rates aloft as well there, in excess of 7 degrees Celsius per kilometer. So perhaps a little bit of an elevated mixed layer there, with already some steep lapse rates aloft, drier air aloft, going to help really increase that instability going into the afternoon, into kind of that 1,500 to maybe 2,000 joules per kilogram range, assuming heating continues across this region. So thermodynamically, already looking pretty solid there. Not going to take much to get storms to go this afternoon. That could be also a factor in perhaps increasing storm coverage later on this afternoon. Going to be very much uncapped early on in the atmosphere. So we're going to perhaps see a lot of storms go up to the south, though forcing is a little bit on the weaker side, as we said, just broad southwesterly flow aloft. So perhaps two competing factors there in the degree of storm coverage with this particular setup. Farther to the southwest, maybe a little bit better chance for discrete supercells with more of a band structure near that outflow boundary off to the northeast. Wind profiles already looking pretty good, approaching that 30 knot effective bulk shear level, which is kind of on the margins for supercells, but that is expected to increase going into the afternoon. We do have some low-level shear in place already, some low-level curvature there. 128 knots, meter square per second squared effective storm relative helicity. So we are seeing an environment that should improve by the afternoon and is already somewhat favorable for supercells, perhaps a mix of multicells and supercells where shear is a little bit weaker, but we should have enough deep layer shear to support some supercell development, especially near that outflow boundary where low-level shear will be enhanced a little bit. All right, let's look at some model data now. This is the 12Z NAM, this morning's run of the NAM model. Starting at 500 millibars, we'll take a look at what this trough is expected to do across the western half of the U.S. Going to continue to dig down into the desert southwest and western Mexico today, and we'll just maintain this broad belt of southwesterly flow out ahead of this trough. Most of the flow of this trough, as we talked about in the previous video, going to be relegated to the backside of this trough, meaning that it is still going to be in a maturing process, and we're going to be still well removed from really the main exit region of this shortwave here and this jet streak coming in for this for today's setup on Saturday. We're just going to be within this belt of southwesterly flow aloft, which will be enough to increase deep layer shear for supercells. But again, it's not going to be perhaps a super organized threat because of the lack of a robust shortwave aloft within this belt of southwesterly flow and a lack of surface features. So this trough, we're going to, again, have plenty of deep layer shear for supercells, 40 to 50 knots of flow there at 500 millibars for today. Down at 700 millibars, see if we see any little short waves rotating through the flow. And again, we saw this morning on our observed, or on our mesoanalysis data, not a ton of shortwave energy here rotating through, perhaps a little bit here rotating up into West Texas by this afternoon, late this afternoon into early evening, perhaps a little bit of a shortwave there to help things out, but it is very subtle. Perhaps on the backside of this initial shortwave this morning, as we talked about earlier, we may see a little bit of subsidence, so that may be a thing here to help perhaps clear things out on the backside and not allow as much convection on the backside of this convective complex because of this perhaps forcing from this subtle shortwave moving off to the north. Behind it we see subsidence or sinking motion, which is not favorable for storm formation. So we may see a period here of fairly quiet activity across West Texas, perhaps not as much convection on the backside of this complex to allow for full destabilization to be realized and to push that boundary kind of where we expected it initially, kind of in that southeast New Mexico corridor into West Texas there. But again, we're going to have to watch that closely going into the afternoon. But again, not much in the way of shortwave energy here moving in, perhaps a little bit of a shortwave moving in by this afternoon to early evening across West Texas to help things out. But really, it's going to have to come down to the boundary, and convergence along the outflow boundary may have to be what we rely on to allow storms to fire this afternoon in this event. 850 millibars, again, very weak low-level response at this point, not expected to change a whole lot, although we do see a little bit of an increase in the low-level jet after dark. You see a waning in those low-level winds going into the afternoon, maybe 20 knots or so at most across West Texas. Well, that is certainly on the weaker side for most tornado and significant tornado events. So that, I would suspect the photographs might be a little bit on the weaker side. We do see an increase in low-level jet going into the early evening hours, but by then, questions remain whether or not we'll still see discrete supercells ongoing, with the boundary perhaps draped from northeast to southwest and the mid to upper level flow kind of parallel to that. We may see a fairly quick transition to more of a banded linear structure here to this convection, and that is what is expected to happen this evening, especially across northwest Texas into southwest and central Oklahoma. We'll have more of a band or line of storms with that damaging wind and embedded tornado threat up there. But down here, where the forcing is on the weaker side, so we may not see a ton of updrafts go up, but given the flow aloft is pretty parallel to the initiating boundary, which should be the outflow boundary, could be problematic for maintaining discrete supercells in this setup. But we do see an increase in low-level shear after dark. That could mean quite a few spin-up tornadoes within the line as it marches off to the east. Very strong low-level jet across Oklahoma there by the early morning hours on Sunday. So as this MCS continues to push off to the east, it will be interacting with a very sheared air mass, especially in the low levels. So that spin-up tornado threat needs to be high on everyone's minds here, especially the OKC Metro down to Lawton, Wichita Falls this evening as the MCS transitions off to the east. Down at the surface, we should not really see much in the way of strong surface cyclogenesis here today. We see exactly where that boundary looks to set up here. If we zoom into our southern plains sector, you can see where that temperature gradient is. It's a little bit farther off to the north than I suspected. This is at 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time today, and we see it a little bit farther north than what was expected. I don't know how accurate that's going to be. If we do see an increase in low-level flow here, and we don't see a ton of convection on the tail end of this convective complex, then we may see the boundary kind of stall out here and maybe transition off to the north a little bit. SPC seems to think it's going to be a little bit farther off to the south, down here across southeast New Mexico into West Texas, kind of the Jal, Midland, Odessa area, just based on where they have that tornado risk for today, which I will show you once again here. So the NAM appears to have the boundary a little bit farther off to the north here, maybe closer to Lubbock. So we'll have to see where that ends up. Based on where convection is now and the lack of a robust surface cyclone to really bump up those low-level winds and transition that boundary off to the north and let it retreat, to allow it to retreat, I think this is a pretty good estimate of where that greatest threat is going to be and where that boundary will set up. The NAM has it a little bit farther off to the north, which is interesting here. Something we will have to watch going into the afternoon, as again, that boundary may have to be the focus for storm initiation and any more robust severe threat for the afternoon round of storms. But the overall pattern looks good here. This boundary is going to be somewhere in West Texas to southeast New Mexico, and where that sets up is going to be the sweet spot today. Going into 7 p.m., we don't again see very robust low-level cyclogenesis. Tomorrow, going into tonight and tomorrow morning, we should start to see cyclogenesis. We'll go into tomorrow's threat here in just a second. Moisture advection, again, not going to be an issue. We already have plenty of moisture up here into these regions. Dew points in the 60s, going to continue to move off to the east. We do see a little bit of mixing down here. We see dew points decrease a little bit. This is just after lunchtime here, 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time. We do see a little bit of a decrease in the dew points here. That, again, could be due to some vertical mixing. Some of that drier air aloft here in the Midland sounding may start to get transported down to the surface with that vertical heating. As air, we talked about vertical mixing before. As air rises, that can bring air up from below, but also bring it down from above. And that does include some of that drier air just above 850 millibars. So dew points may suffer a little bit this afternoon, may decrease here, but we should maintain at least southerly to southeasterly flow to help maintain adequate dew points across this region. Dew points in the 60s by 7 p.m. all the way up to the New Mexico-Texas border, but we'll have to watch that for sure. And that clearly is where the NAM has the boundary. Clear dew point gradient up there across in almost the southern Texas panhandle. That's pretty far north. So that is very interesting that the NAM has it there. I wonder if some of the other models have it there. We'll take a look at some of the cams here in just a second. But this is exactly where the NAM has the boundary, which is pretty far north compared to what the SPC believes, at least where they have their outlook. So moisture continues to advect off to the north going into the overnight hours. Plenty of juice for that MCS to work with here across Oklahoma and North Texas. So that low-level shear combined with this moisture could really persist that spin-up tornado threat within that line as it goes off to the east, impinging upon the OKC and even DFW metroplexes this evening into the early morning hours tomorrow. All right, couple of soundings here. We'll take a sounding out here kind of just near Midland, Odessa, in that little bit better tongue of moisture here for this afternoon. And then we'll take one here at 0Z up here in northwest Texas, and then maybe one here going into the kind of midnight time frame, 1 a.m. Central Daylight Time here at the Oklahoma City area. So this is what we have going on far west Texas there, Midland at 4 p.m. Not much in the way of low-level shear, as expected. As those low-level winds decrease going into the afternoon, we'll see very limited low-level shear. Strong deep-layer shear, though, for supercells with lengthy photographs. Enough instability to support a severe threat. Would suspect that this is a little bit on the cool side here, that will get those temperatures up closer to 80 degrees, if not exceeding 80 degrees. So we should have plenty of instability, not really too worried about this. A little bit of an inversion here remaining on the NAM. That is that NAM typical cool bias, but we do have steep lapse rates aloft, enough instability, a little bit on the skinny side, as we talked about in our previous video, only 1,400 joules per kilogram of CAPE, and it is a little bit on the skinny side. Again, of course, that would increase if we had a little bit stronger heating there on this model, which I do suspect is going to be the case. But overall, plenty of instability, stronger instability there at the freezing level, steep lapse rates aloft with strong deep layer shear for supercells should support a large to very large hail threat today. Limited tornado risk, I do believe, away from the boundary. If we were to take a sounding right on this boundary, again, I think this is a little bit too far north. But if we were to take the forecast sounding right on the boundary, we may see a little bit stronger low-level shear. And there you go. So that is what we're concerned about here right along that boundary, is this very strong low-level curvature. As we know, low-level shear is increased along outflow boundaries because of the wind shift along them. And we have pretty decent instability as well. Almost 2,000 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE there right along that boundary. So that boundary is, again, going to be critical. I keep hammering it in, but that is going to be critical for today's setup. Where that boundary sets up, if any supercells can track along that boundary, they will have an enhanced tornado risk, as well as that large hail and damaging wind risk. But the tornado risk will certainly be relegated to that boundary. This is at 0Z, not 21Z. So I suspect that we do see at least a little bit of an increase as well in the low-level jet, stronger low-level shear there along that boundary by evening. And you can see there, this is at 4 p.m., see much stronger curvature there along that boundary. So that boundary is going to be key, and where that sets up is going to be where the strongest tornado risk is going to occur. And the SPC right now believes that to be southeast New Mexico into west Texas. Again, it's just kind of a wait and see where this boundary sets up with convection still ongoing this morning. But that is something to really monitor as we go into the afternoon hours. So this is northwest Texas by early evening, as that ahead of perhaps the MCS off farther to the north. Again, plenty of low-level shear to support a tornado risk within that MCS, plenty of instability to support that risk moving off to the east, going into the overnight hours. This is at Oklahoma City. Just after midnight, plenty of low-level shear, strong moistening, continued warm moist advection there at the surface, plenty of instability will support that spin-up tornado threat going into the evening hours tonight with that MCS. So folks that are in these areas, OKC, Lawton, Wichita Falls, need to have those weather radios handy and turn those phones on to get those alerts because you will be under a tornado risk this evening well after you go to sleep. So that is something to watch for sure and could be a significant risk as we go into the central Oklahoma, North Texas corridor tonight. So that is what is going on for today. Once again, let's see some cams here, see how the morning models have handled this. Don't really trust the morning models when we have a ton of morning convection like this, the convection allowing models when we have a lot of convection like this already. The HRRR has seemed to handle it pretty well. Nice band here moving across West Texas, as was what is ongoing right now. Pretty decent depiction here. This is at 10 a.m. Modeled on the HRRR. This is what we have right now. So pretty decent depiction of what's going on right now. So let's see how this progresses through the afternoon. MCS continues off to the east. And we do see supercell development out here across southeast New Mexico and far west Texas by about 20Z or so, 19 to 20Z or so, which is 2 to 3 p.m. Central Daylight Time, 1 to 2 p.m. Mountain Time. They move off to the east pretty quickly. We do maintain some semblance of discrete supercell activity. Again, it's not all that organized per se, but we do see some semblance of discrete supercell activity here out across these regions through the afternoon. And then we see by evening, kind of everything congeals into more of a linear complex, more banded structure to these storms. And again, pretty robust MCS. This is at 1 a.m. Central Daylight Time. And that, again, will pose a tornado risk along the leading edge, as well as a damaging wind risk as it moves off into Oklahoma and North Texas here. So robust MCS here on the HRRR model. So that is a big threat going into the overnight hours tonight. But that supercell development out there, the HRRR seems to like this area here where the SPC kind of has that risk. And so they suspect that the boundary might be in there. Let's take a look at the low-level moisture field to see where that boundary is here on the HRRR, just to see how it compares to the NAM. Again, the NAM was very far north with the boundary. This is, again, at 4 p.m., 7 p.m., very farther off to the north from what we expected. And so let's see here with what the And there you go. The HRRR has it much farther to the south, and therefore that robust supercell risk is focused right along that boundary there in southeast New Mexico to far west Texas. So a little bit of difference among the models. The NAM a little bit much farther to the north. The HRRR, I think, is a little bit more accurate with where this boundary is going to be, just considering where the convection is now. I suspect it'll be somewhere down here in southeast New Mexico to west Texas. So the HRRR definitely on board, and again, where that boundary sets up is going to be where the greatest tornado risk is going to be, and it does have supercell development out here along that boundary later on this afternoon. So that those supercells would have that all hazards threat, including significant hail and a tornado or two. How about the ARW model? So the ARW model has that band of convection this morning, a little bit farther to the north maybe than what it is right now. We do see a little bit of more southerly persistence compared to what the ARW model has right now. So something to note for sure. Would probably have the boundary a little bit farther north as well, but you can see robust supercell development there, far southeast corner of New Mexico by, let's say, 20 to 21Z or so, so 3 to 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time, 2 to 3 p.m. Mountain Time. Robust supercells move off to the east. Pretty discrete for quite a while here, especially this one down here across West Texas. Very discrete there for quite a while before things kind of congeal into a line with that tornado and damaging wind risk going into the overnight hours tonight. NSSL WRF model. Much of the same, again, a little bit too far north with where the convective complex is now. But again, the idea is the same, robust supercell development out there across the southeast corner of New Mexico by mid-afternoon or so, moves off to the east, and then congeals into a line. So the models are pretty much on board here with initial supercell development somewhere out in this area. The NAM is a little bit too far north with the boundary, so that is something to note. The cams are a little bit more accurate with where the boundary is going to set up. And then we congeal things into a line, again with a tornado and damaging wind risk going into the evening, nighttime, and overnight hours tonight into Sunday morning. All right, now we'll take a look at tomorrow's setup. And again, tomorrow's setup hinges on what happens with today's setup. So they have just maintained a slight risk out here from Oklahoma southward into West Texas because of the uncertainty in the overnight convection. You can see on the models here that that MCS persists through the morning. And we see a pretty quick transition to a second round of storms very early on across West Texas that may ruin the environment later on in the afternoon. So let's go back to our models here. I'll zoom out to our 500 millibar contiguous U.S. view. So starting this evening, we see that trough continue to move to dig down into the desert southwest and western Mexico. Stronger flow starts to impinge upon the central and southern plains here. So broad southwesterly flow, the trough does finally start to move off to the east. So we'll start to feel the true impacts of the exit region of this trough throughout the day tomorrow. Still just a broad belt of southwesterly flow out ahead of this trough. And then Monday, we really start to feel the effects of that trough, and it really starts to eject into the southern plains. But for tomorrow, broad southwesterly flow, we do kind of start to see a little bit stronger forcing here make its way in. With multiple little embedded short waves in here. Down at 700 millibars, let's take a look. 700 millibars, we'll see if there are any short waves moving through. There should be quite a few speed maxima, little short waves moving through the overall flow here out across the southern plains. And we see going into the overnight hours, convectively enhanced vorticity maximum here. A little bit of a speed max. That is going to be due to that MCS. Going into tomorrow, we see a little bit of a shortwave developing here as well, a little bit of curvature there in the flow. So that is something to note. Very robust shortwave energy. That could be due to that second round of convection as well. So a few convectively enhanced vorticity maxima and little speed maxes rotating through here at 700 millibars, perhaps providing a little bit of extra ascent here for the Oklahoma to Texas area. We should start to see low-level cyclogenesis here this evening into the overnight hours tonight, and you'll see that in spades here. We start to see a more robust surface low by Sunday morning, much more robust surface low out in here across eastern Colorado into the central high plains. We see further development down there in southeast Colorado by Sunday evening. Nice little surface low there. That will help really increase the pressure gradient out here, really start to back and strengthen those low-level winds to continue to pump the moisture into the region. And then moisture here should be pretty solid here across the area for tomorrow's event. We see that broad plume this evening, broad plume of 60 dew points all the way up into southern Kansas, across much of Oklahoma. That will persist through the overnight hours tonight into tomorrow, and we have a broad area of robust moisture here with a much tighter dry line than what we see today. The problem is you see a lot of holes here in the dew point map here. That is because of preceding convection. So that early round of storms persisting from this evening into the overnight hours and morning hours tomorrow, that is going to be our first round of storms sweeping through Oklahoma. And then very early on, we see development out here across West Texas move off to the east, and that is going to have an impact in the environment tomorrow. So it looks to be a pretty complex, very conditional setup for really robust development, because we'll have so much convection ongoing in the morning to early afternoon that may just wreck the environment for any robust activity tomorrow, at least any real robust supercell activity. Looks like a very quick transition to more of a squall line in both of these cases. The initial round of storms should be a squall line as well, as modeled by our cams here. See that squall line here moves through going into the overnight hours tonight. That's our first round, and then initial development ahead of that shortwave by late Sunday morning into early afternoon. Very quick transition to a line there, and that is going to sweep through and just kind of wreck things here later on. And really, this is what the main severe threat is expected to be tomorrow, is this MCS moving through Oklahoma and North Texas, and that should pose that tornado risk as well as a damaging wind risk. The low-level jet probably going to be a little bit stronger tomorrow because we have a little bit more robust low-level cyclogenesis here, and we do see that 35 to 40 knots, even some 50 knots spots there within that low-level jet plume across Texas and Oklahoma into the Midwest there. So much stronger low-level flow tomorrow should pose a risk for some embedded tornadoes within that second round of storms, as well as that initial round of storms going into tomorrow morning. We do have a broad warm sector. It is fairly broad of a warm sector here. A lot of real estate here in the warm sector, stretching really all the way to the Mississippi River over here. So one area I am watching is perhaps this area in the Arklatex region. We do see it kind of being undisturbed through the afternoon, and we will have strong low-level warm moist advection out here across this region on that stronger low-level jet and stronger surface flow. So that could mean we have more of a warm advection regime out here, and if we have any subtle forcing across the warm sector, we saw a little bit of that forcing out here, perhaps a little bit of a wave here moving through, maybe convectively enhanced, but it is a little bit of a wave. If we get a glancing blow from that out here, that could be enough to initiate some more isolated development out here in the open warm sector across East Texas into southeast and eastern Oklahoma, western Arkansas, northwest Louisiana. So that is something to watch for sure. We'll take a look at our cams here again in a second to see how that is modeled. But let's take some soundings here across the region. Again, it's going to be tough to find a non-contaminated sounding out here across this corridor of central Oklahoma, but we'll try our best here. See a lot of convection there. I'm going to try to pull one out to the east a little bit, maybe just slightly away from the convection here, to see what our environment might look like ahead of it. And this is a little bit more accurate here. So instability, again, going to be on the weaker side. Still, from a numbers perspective, plenty of instability to support robust updraft, 12 to 1300 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPIT. So this is going to be daylight savings tonight. We fall back an hour, so this is going to be at 3 p.m. Central Standard Time tomorrow in Oklahoma. Enough instability from a numbers perspective to support a severe threat, but it is a little bit on the skinny side as well, and that may have to do with that morning round of storms. They're very kind of saturated, not quite saturated, but very moist profile here, all the way up above 700 millibars. But we do have strong low-level shear, much stronger low-level shear than today. Over 200 meters squared per second squared effective storm relative helicity. Nice curvature there in the low levels of the hodograph, so that should foster an embedded tornado risk with that second round of storms moving off to the east across Oklahoma. So we'll have to watch that as we go into tomorrow. And a damaging wind risk will be on the table as well, given the more linear storm mode. Then let's take a sounding out in here, out across kind of northeast Texas in the better moisture plume, more undisturbed air mass out here across northeast Texas. We should have fairly strong flow. Instability a little bit wonky. I tend to think maybe 74 degrees at the surface is a little bit on the cool side, especially if we maintain a little bit more clearing out here. Should get temperatures up in the upper 70s to low 80s perhaps. So I suspect we'll have a little bit more instability than this across this region. The thing to note, though, is strong low-level shear. So any supercells that can sustain themselves, and this is conditional, by the way, but any supercells that can sustain themselves out across this Arklatex region will have a low probability all hazards risk. And the SPC has pointed that out in their outlook for day 2. They did mention the possibility of perhaps a few supercells out in this region across northeast Texas during the afternoon. Again, instability looks to be maybe a little bit of a concern. I suspect we'll have a little bit more than this to work with, but we just need a little bit here with this kind of a sheared air mass. Plenty of deep layer shear for supercells, strong low-level shear, so that would support an all-hazards risk with any supercells that can sustain themselves, and that's a big if, but if any supercells can sustain, they would support an all-hazards threat there across the northeast Texas to Arklatex vicinity tomorrow afternoon. So some cams here. We'll go back to the HER for today, and let's see, our 12Z HER going into tomorrow. So again, this overnight round of storms emanating from West Texas going to form a pretty robust MCS overnight. Very strong MCS here, very kinky MCS, if you will. Lots of little kinks here, and that could indicate some embedded circulations there within the line. Given a strengthening low-level jet, certainly expect a few spin-up tornadoes within this line. So Tulsa down to Oklahoma City, even down toward the North Texas area. So Wichita Falls over toward, the I-35 corridor of far North Texas, Windstar area. Going into the overnight hours to morning hours tomorrow, we'll have to watch very closely the threat for damaging winds and some spin-up tornadoes there as this initial MCS moves off to the east. Very quick transition. We see by just really the morning hours, we start to see additional development down there across west to southwest Texas, and that is going to quickly congeal into a clustered linear mode there. You see a lot of convection out here. Just a very disorganized kind of setup here, but this should develop into an MCS as well. Moving through central Oklahoma, this is going to pose a heavy rain risk as well. We'll talk about that there in just a second after we finish our severe threat. But again, multiple rounds of strong to severe storms here, embedded tornado risk with this MCS, damaging winds as well. We do see some beans out here in the open warm sector, eastern Oklahoma, western Arkansas, down into east Texas. So again, if any supercells can sustain out in this region, they would pose an all hazards risk. Not really anything super robust here on the HER, but the HER does have trouble sometimes modeling these kind of lower probability mini supercell type setups out here. So we'll have to watch that area for sure. MCS continues off to the east, kind of training storms here across this region, central Oklahoma into northeast Oklahoma, hence the heavy rain and flash flood risk there. But that MCS will continue to pose the damaging wind and tornado risk going into tomorrow evening into Monday morning. How about our ARW model here for tomorrow? So there's our MCS overnight, tornado and damaging wind risk, very early development out here, as shown by the HER as well. Very early development up there across West Texas tomorrow morning, quickly congeals into a line. And again, you see some warm advection little beans out here, something to watch going into the afternoon. Not anything really robust on this model as well, so it is a low probability threat there, but something to watch for sure. NSSL WRF model. Much of the same, I suspect. Quick MCS overnight, quick MCS formation tomorrow morning. Not much in the way of development out here, but again, it is conditional, but if anything can develop out there, all hazard threat would persist. And then we go into Monday. Monday, again, a little bit unclear as to what's going to happen as well because of the overnight convection Sunday into Monday morning. Kind of deja vu here, Sunday to Monday morning. But again, the SPC has that broad, slight risk for now to cover where the severe threat may persist going into Monday. So Monday, we finally start to see the trough really eject into the plains. Kind of takes on a little bit more of a negative tilt, a little bit of a shortwave here, perhaps out across Oklahoma, there and into North Texas. So very much stronger forcing Monday. And the flow aloft should be fairly meridional as well. Meridional means kind of north-south here. So you can see very much meridional flow across this region. And if we were to look at our initiating boundary, which should be probably the cold front here as it pushes off to the east with a well-developed surface low, I might add. So that surface low that developed in southeast Colorado on Sunday afternoon moves off to the east, well-developed frontal zones with it, and moves off into Oklahoma, the Oklahoma region by Monday morning to early afternoon. And so cold front down in this region here. And with our flow aloft very much parallel to that, should be a very quick transition to a line for any convection that develops as well, given the strong forcing with this setup. So here's our moisture here, our initiating boundary somewhere in here. So our frontal zone / dry line, Pacific front, whatever you want to call it, that's going to be our initiating boundary. And our shear vectors, due to that meridional flow aloft, very much parallel to the initiating boundary. So that is going to cause a very quick transition to a linear storm mode on Monday as well. So not really seeing much in the way of discrete supercell activity tomorrow into Monday. Mostly just going to be an MCS severe weather threat. But again, the profiles are favorable for strong damaging winds and some spin-up tornadoes in these lines. Now on Monday, the low-level shear is going to be a lot weaker here. So this is our surface pattern going into Monday. This is at noon Central Standard Time on Monday. Surface low still out of the south. Low-level jet here out of the south as well. So not much directional shear here in the low levels, leading to more subdued low-level photographs. Mostly just speed shear here. I'll take a sounding here out from southern Oklahoma, southeast Oklahoma on Monday. And that should give us an idea of what the environment's going to look like here. Should be enough instability. And this is quite a bit different than what models were showing the other day. Models were showing a much more straight line photograph the other day in our video. That is not the case here with this NAM sounding. We do see mostly just speed shear here, especially in the lowest kilometer with not a ton of turning there. But we do see strong turning in the lowest few kilometers of the atmosphere. Very strong speed shear as well, to give us a much more curved photograph. So that would certainly allow for some tornado risk within the squall line. Plenty of instability here. Again, that is in question based on where the morning convection and how persistent and widespread that morning convection is on Monday morning. But the NAM does seem to think we're going to destabilize pretty nicely here going into the afternoon, almost 1900 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE there, which would support that severe risk. And this is certainly eye-opening here. If these photographs persist, that would support a tornado risk within the squall line, the MCS there across Oklahoma especially. And then off to the north here, we should see a pretty pervasive area for where these storms develop here, all the way up into Missouri, down into East Texas there. Take a couple soundings from across the region here. So this is one off to the north and then one down to the south. So this is East Texas there on Monday afternoon. Much of the same, not a ton of low-level directional shear, but plenty of curvature there in the lowest few kilometers of the photograph. Enough instability on the NAM here to support a severe threat. Again, that is in question, but the NAM does think we will destabilize on Monday. And then up to the north, pretty strong shear as well. More limited instability, though, as you get farther to the north up into Kansas and Missouri there. But plenty of low-level shear across the region, which is certainly a change. So the saving grace here for Monday will be the storm mode, thankfully. These photographs certainly eye-opening here for a tornado risk, but the storm mode should preclude that very quick transition to a squall line. But an embedded tornado risk certainly is there with that squall line. And some damaging winds as well on Monday. Cams don't go out that far, so we won't look at the cams for Monday. And again, it still is going to be predicated on what happens Sunday into Monday morning, but overall looks like another MCS type setup on Monday with that embedded tornado and damaging wind risk. Again, the heavy rain threat is also going to be elevated with this setup as well. As you saw, multiple rounds of training storms over the same areas over and over again, basically central to northeast Oklahoma into southeast Kansas, Missouri, down into parts of Texas. So widespread area for heavy rainfall and flash flooding that is possible. Flash flood watch has been issued by the Weather Service offices in these areas. I'll show you that just for now here. So this dark green here is a flash flood watch there. So our main flash flood watch, we do have one out here for southeast New Mexico into West Texas to cover today's risk, yesterday and today's risk. But our main flash flood watch is out here for the next few days across Oklahoma, far northwest Texas, much of the central and eastern Oklahoma corridor up into northeast Oklahoma, far southeast Kansas. Would not be surprised to see this extended off to the northeast as well. Especially covering the rain threat up there for Monday, perhaps into Tuesday as well. So flash flooding is certainly going to be a concern with the upcoming upcoming few days. The WPC has outlined elevated heavy rainfall and flash flooding risks here for the next several days. This is today's risk, slight risk level 2 out of 4. stretching up from the New Mexico-Texas border all the way up into southeast Kansas for today. And then tomorrow we have a moderate risk there from central to southern Oklahoma, northeastward into southeast Kansas and western Missouri. Level 3 out of 4 moderate risk there. So again, that is due to the training MCSs across these areas. Convective rainfall will enhance the rainfall rates across these areas. And again, multiple rounds will just lead to exacerbated impacts from heavy rainfall and flooding. Then we go into Monday. That slight risk extends from northeast Texas northward into the Great Lakes region. And then we see just some low-end risks after that. But the next few days certainly going to be heavy rainfall and flash flooding going to be a significant risk, particularly tomorrow across Oklahoma into southeast Kansas and western Missouri. Total precipitation amounts through the next 5 days. We are seeing some evidence of some pretty intense rainfall rates, perhaps approaching or even exceeding 10 inches in some spots here, especially across central to northeast Oklahoma. The kind of gold color there is 7 to 10 inches, and localized amounts in stronger convective bursts could exceed 10 inches. So a lot of significant flash flooding is on the way. And I'm sure we're going to be seeing some water rescues, unfortunately, here over the coming days in low-lying areas. But overall, this orange area here all the way up from northwest Texas into central Missouri, that is 5 to 7 inches. So a widespread area of 5 to 7 inches of rainfall with embedded areas of 7 to 10 inches and perhaps locally greater across much parts of Oklahoma there. So heavy rainfall is going to be a significant risk with this setup alongside the severe threat. So next few days certainly going to bring multiple hazards to the southern plains into the Midwest. For the severe threat today, again, a slight risk from southeast New Mexico, west Texas, northeastward into the central Oklahoma area. Supercells look to fire down here across the southeast New Mexico to west Texas corridor this afternoon, and then things will kind of congeal into a pretty significant MCS overnight, moving into central Oklahoma and northwest Texas, posing a risk for a few spin-up tornadoes and damaging winds there. That will move through going into the overnight hours and morning hours tomorrow, and then we'll see a severe threat develop again tomorrow afternoon. Fairly early on, a second round of storms will develop out here across west Texas and quickly move off to the northeast. That will will congeal into an MCS, posing again a risk for spin-up tornadoes and damaging winds, with a conditional threat for a few supercells out here across northeast Texas into the Arklatex vicinity. Very conditional risk, but if supercells can sustain out here, they would pose an all-hazards risk. But the main threat is expected to come from these MCSs through the morning across Oklahoma, and our second MCS moving into Oklahoma, North Texas, into the afternoon and evening hours on Sunday. Posing that significant damaging wind and spin-up tornado risk there. Then we go into Monday. Again, ongoing convection in the morning is going to have an impact on what happens on Monday, but more so another MCS event looks likely across these areas, given strong forcing and fairly meridional flow parallel to our initiating boundary. That should quickly congeal storms into an MCS with enough shear to provide a tornado risk and damaging wind risk from all the way up from the central Missouri area down into the eastern to central Texas corridor. So folks in these areas for the next few days, these are going to be it's going to be a long duration severe threat. We will have overnight severe storms. So folks in these areas, Oklahoma City, Lawton, Wichita Falls, definitely need to be on alert for overnight severe risks. So have those weather radios handy. Have multiple ways of receiving warnings, and we will get through this event just fine. Again, heavy rainfall also going to be a threat with this upcoming system for the next few days. So heavy rainfall and flash flooding is going to be a concern going into the next few days. So that's going to do it for this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.